afternoon and welcome to Seniors Count. I'm your host, Tula Mall. On our show, we believe that you are the foundation on which Boston was built. So our goal is to connect you to resources, benefits, and information to enhance your life. Thank you for joining us. Today, my guest is Cynthia Casoff Henry, author of the new book called Dying, A Guide to More Peaceful Death. She's here to share how her book has helped readers find peace, comfort, and acceptance during the most difficult stage of life. Thank you for being here, Cynthia.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. So I want to start off by asking you, what prompted you to write this book?
Well, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I've been a nurse for 47 years, and I was a midwife in private practice, actually, in New York for many years. And then I decided to recreate myself again, and I became a hospice nurse. And at the same time I was a hospice nurse, it became apparent that my mother was getting dementia, and she lived in Florida. So my husband and I packed, bought a little house in Florida, and brought my mother to live with us. And I then proceeded to take care of her for 5.5 years. And I was a hospice nurse in Florida too.
Oh, wow.
I started in Massachusetts and then went to Florida. And so for 5.5 years, I took care of her. And at the same time, I was working as a hospice nurse. And I realized when she finally did die, which was a beautiful, peaceful death at home with me lying next to her. And I thought to myself, you know, I'm not a writer, but that here I was a provider, a care provider, and a hospice nurse, and I had the benefit of understanding both parts. So I thought that I would write this book, which is a very simple book, to explain to people the steps that they can go through to make it less complicated, because it is such a difficult time.
Yeah. So that was actually going to be my next question, is what makes you an expert in this topic? So it's how many years were you a hospice nurse? Can you give us a little?
Sure. I was a hospice nurse for 8.5 years, and at the same time taking care of my mother for 5.5 years. But I was also a nurse for all those years before that, so clearly I was involved with people that were very ill, and so I've always been taking care of people, and I've always had the understanding about all the different cycles of life, especially being a midwife. You know, that was the beginning of life, and then I, went to the end of life. But it's all very similar because it's families in crisis. Even though having a baby is a happy thing, it's still a crisis of sorts because it's something so new.
Big changes in life, right? So who is this book for?
Well, I think this book is for everybody. I think it's a very simply written book. It's a very thin book because I didn't think people, especially if they are in crisis, are going to want to sit down and read a 400-page book. So I think this book is mostly for people my age, which is, I'm the first group of the boomers. And I think it's mostly because we're the people that are now getting diagnoses and we're taking care of our parents. So it's a twofold thing, but it really is for everybody, because I personally know of people in their 20s taking care of their parents. So it's, it's for people to have an understanding that as much as it's a very sad time, it's also a time to rejoice in who the person is that's ill, and also to live the best life you can until the end.
And there's so many books about, so you talk about the stages of life. There's so many books about pretty much every stage of life, though. If you're having a baby, how to plan for a baby, so many. If you have teenagers, what to do with them. But there's, I haven't seen that many books about grief. When my brother passed away, I looked for something to explain that, what I was feeling. And it was really hard for me to find. So, I don't know if they've shown the book, but this is the book. And it is very thin. And the font's pretty big.
I did that on purpose.
Do you know what the font is? Maybe 614?
I don't know what it is, but I did that, and I also put a page after every chapter that's blank so that people could actually take notes for themselves.
I see.
And I did that on purpose because I think most of the people that really are going to buy it are a little bit older, and so I just made it that it was easier.
And it was. I read through it, and it was very easy to read. You could really get through the chapters quickly, but I agree with you. There aren't that many books out there that cover this topic. And so would you say this is for the people taking care of those who are dying, or as well for someone who maybe got a terminal illness and is, how to prepare for their own?
It's definitely for both.
For both.
It's for both the person taken care of, it's for the person who is ill, and it's also for the surrounding loved ones. Because a lot of people have such difficulty with the topic that they almost can't even be involved. But I think that my book will maybe help people to understand because it's such a complicated issue.
Yeah.
You know, people kind of bring it back to themselves because I think everybody's a little bit afraid of dying. So if they can be a little more comfortable with it, then maybe they can help a little more for the person. Because I find that within families, there's usually one child or one person who kind of takes charge. In my case, it was me and my family because I'm a nurse, and I was also a hospice nurse. I mean, it would have been, you know, almost ridiculous if I wasn't the person to take care of my mother. Yeah. So, you know, but it's nice to have a group around.
Yeah, and I can imagine it's probably a nice book if you are dealing with this situation to be able to talk with. So if it's, you know, you have it, you give it to your siblings while
Absolutely.
it's something to help you guys talk about what you're dealing with. So, and you kind of covered this, but why is it difficult for people to talk about these subjects?
Well, I think the first reason is fear. It's fear of the unknown. We know what happens when you're born because then you live. But none of us have been there. I certainly haven't been there and hope not to be for a while. But and so I think it's fear of the unknown. Yeah. Because we don't know what happens. But I feel that this has been my mission since I decided to write the book. I mean, I've always been a teacher. I taught midwifery, and I also have been teaching people about death and dying for years now. But I think it's my mission to help people feel a little more comfortable. It's not really a happy time, but again, it's a time that can be easier than it is often the case.
You know, and it's funny because different cultures handle death differently. And in some cultures, you can't even talk about it, don't even bring up the word.
Absolutely.
And then if someone dies, you have to destroy like all sorts of photos. Like, it's very interesting. So I think this book can help deal with the different, like, is good for any culture dealing with
Absolutely, because it's my point was it's kind of like who I am. I'm a very straightforward person. My husband always explained to me, he has 8 children. And when I married him 25 years ago, he said to his children, you'll never have to worry about what Cynthia's thinking because it's right on her face. And I think that's how my book is. It's very clear, it's to the point. You know, and I think that's how I conduct, when I work with people, that's how I conduct it. I mean, I don't throw it in their face because if somebody can't handle it, then I do back off a little bit. Soften. But on the other hand, it makes it, once people understand, and again, with other cultures, I've worked with every culture, and it is interesting because each culture actually has its
own take on it.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. What do you have any tips for how to start the conversation with an older parent?
Well, explain that.
So do you have any tips to give our audience if for them to start the conversation about, you know, how, you know, what they should start thinking about if, you know, as they're preparing, you know, for their later years? Or
well, I think the most important thing I can think of is getting everything in order. And I talk about this a lot in the book because unfortunately there's so many negative things that do happen when people have living wills or you know, whatever it is that they want, their desires are, a lot of times families do not respect that. I have literally had to go with a chart and say to the family, why are you not doing what your loved one wanted? And I think if you start that ahead of time when you're not sick, you'll have a much more believable, like if you say, this is what I truly want, and let's do it together. Now, I write about it in the book, there's now a legal document, and it is legal in Massachusetts, called the 5 Wishes, and you can get that online or from a hospice. You don't have to be in hospice to get it, but you can get it from a social worker. And you actually can write down, it's not done by a lawyer, but it is legal in, I think, 42 states or something like that, and Massachusetts is one of them. And you actually write down your wishes, and you can do it with your family, with your children. Now, it is a little bit painful, but when you're well is the time to do it. Yeah. So I think that's the most important part of all of this, is to get everything in order, to have the conversation before it becomes a crisis, because then everybody is so emotional. And so it's best to do that early on.
So can you tell us what you mean by get everything in order? Like maybe give us 3 things that people should get into order. Yeah.
Well, you have your will, which is your possessions. You have your living will or 5 wishes. You have what's called, well, if you choose to have a do not resuscitate order. And that's where it gets the most emotional. Because a lot of times people have decided, especially when they get to be much older, or if they're very, very sick, and obviously if they're dying, they're very, very sick. So they do not want to be resuscitated. They do not want to have tubes put in. They want to die a natural death because their body is failing. And so many, many times I have heard families say, oh, I don't think they really meant that, or I can't, or they say, the most common one is, I can't live without this person. And I have had to say many times, it's really not about you.
Yeah. So
really
having
is.
the documentation there
And
can
review-
help with that
Oh, it
conversation
totally
that the
does.
nurse or doctor may have to have with the family.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Also, you can add on things like if people want to donate organs. You know, all these things need to be done ahead of time because you kind of can't arrange this. You know, there's enough going on at the time of illness. So it's very important.
Do you
to
have these
that.
things listed in the book? So
I do.
people can kind of go through.
I
and,
do.
Okay, well, that would be
and
helpful.
the other thing that I think is extremely important is I also have 7 very important questions for people to ask the doctor.
Okay.
Because what's happening is that, you know, especially for the older generation, not my generation, because my generation, and certainly your generation, is much more assertive. And you can go to the doctor and say, well, how about this? Or I've seen this on the internet. But the older generation, their 80s and 90s.
Like the Depression era or World War II,
Exactly,
right? Yep.
and they feel that the doctor knows best. Well, it's not that the doctor doesn't know best, but you know, there's so much information out there that we know a lot too.
Yeah.
So it's important to ask the right questions, such as if somebody's getting a lot of chemo or radiation, you know, to ask the doctor, is this appropriate? Is this going to help my quality of life? Because I want to live well until my time is up. So I think, I give 7 very important questions to ask the doctor, and I suggest that people always bring another person with you to the doctor office, because that can be overwhelming too.
So can you give us an example of what the most perfect transition to death could be? And you can give multiple, so someone who's in hospice, maybe someone who isn't, just...
Whatever it is, I think that the entire family, friends, whoever the people that are involved with the person who's dying need to be on board and be at the same place and to be calm. You know, again, I've come to bedsides, I can't tell you how many times, whether it be at home or in a hospital setting, because I did both with hospice, and you know, people are just crying and being absolutely hysterical and saying things, not realizing that even the person is unconscious, they can hear.
Yeah.
And so I think what's so important is for everybody to be on board, to kind of step outside themselves and to enjoy the person, to love that person, to cherish that person, and to just review their life with them, even if they are not.
Yeah, you gave examples of that in the book about, well, I remember one was when people were talking about the person in the room and you had asked them, or I don't know if it was you, but it was a story.
It was me. I'm pretty
you
clear
asked
about
them
that.
to leave the room.
Right. They were talking about furniture and who's going to get what.
Yes, that's what it was.
And I was pretty upset.
Yeah.
And I explained to them that, you know, your loved one can hear. And the way you know they can hear, and that happened with my own mother, who was actively dying, and we got the whole family in, and she did wait for them. But I put the phone to her ear, and her 2 beloved grandchildren spoke to her.
Yeah.
And her eyes were blinking.
Oh.
And so I knew, even though she was unconscious, she wasn't really unconscious, you know,
completely gone.
She could hear. I put the phone to her ear. I might get a little weepy now because it's a beautiful
it's an emotional
memory.
thing, yeah.
Well, it is. It's very emotional and very beautiful, and she could hear them. And she couldn't smile at the time, but I knew. And they told her they loved her, and she couldn't say anything back, but it was very important. And she did wait till they all got there from New York and Boston, and it was wonderful. It was perfect. It was absolutely perfect. So I think, again, the most important thing is to really, it's a very selfless act, to help somebody die peacefully, is that you kind of have to give over your own personal feelings and let this person express themselves however that is.
Yeah. I think you gave another example, a similar topic, about someone whose eyes were moving. So someone was recounting stories, so things to do with if someone's dying and how to comfort them while they're dying. Touching them, and you talk about telling stories.
Yes, life review.
Yes, life review, and I thought that was really beautiful.
And so what I tell people also at the time, I've done this many times. In fact, I would often start it because people are so afraid, and I would touch the person and I would say, you're a wonderful mother or father or cousin or whoever they are to the person or friend, and you see the eyeball actually moving, and you can see sometimes even the head moving towards the person, just like a little puppy or a kitten or a baby.
Yeah.
You know, when the baby hears, they move. And so it's the exact same thing. And so it's so important. And I know that people hear. I mean, I've seen it, you know, and
You've had
people
a lot
can
of
wait.
experience with it.
Yeah. And so, again, it's a very, and it makes for a beautiful experience for both the person who's dying and for the family to be able to see this person, you know, be almost involved.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about grieving. So, you know, once someone that's close to you passes, what is the most comforting action someone else can do for someone who's grieving? Whether that's a neighbor or even if it is a family member.
Well, I think there are several things, but I think the most important thing is to be able to listen to that person, is not to give them advice and say, oh, you'll get over it. I mean, you know, how many times do people say these? And, you know, I hate to say it's ridiculous, but it is ridiculous because you're always going to have a little bit of grief for the person you love, but they live in your spirit and you love them, and you know, it gets easier after time, but it's never easy. And at the beginning, so I think the most important thing is to listen to that person, let them, you know, don't say don't cry. I mean, then it's okay to cry because you are sad and you miss this person, you love this person. And the other thing is to kind of offer, don't ask, would you like me to do this? Just bring a meal, you know, say, hey, when you're ready, let's go for a pedicure if it's a lady, and if it's a man, well, a man can go for a pedicure too.
That's right.
Whatever. Let's go shopping. I mean, who doesn't want to go shopping? You know, that kind of thing. But that's only when they're ready. But don't be offering all this stuff to make them forget. They're not going to forget.
Yeah.
You know, and they need to live through it. You need to be patient and understanding and know that grief is normal.
Yeah.
The average time is about a year. On the other hand, some people grieve very, very differently and don't even start to grieve for a year. So you have to watch the person and, you know, and just let them do whatever they have to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really difficult thing is knowing what to do when someone, you know, whether it's a coworker, a friend, someone in their family passes. How do you relate to them? How do you talk to them? And I don't think there is enough information out there. And so people say the same thing all the time. Oh, sorry for your loss. But I've always thought there's got to be another thing to say or something else to do. And I agree with you with the whole, you know, instead of offering, like, can I help? Just actually do something specific. You know, like, can I take you out for lunch? Or I'd like to take you out for lunch or for a cup of coffee or
bring the lunch to them.
Yeah.
And just say, you know, and just to let them know that you really understand that they're hurting and that it's okay. And that you don't even have to talk.
Then, you
don't even have to talk.
Then just listening to them.
Exactly.
You know, deal with the situation or even, you know, whatever. All right, so I have one more question. Most often when we discuss dying, we're talking about a person who has had a long life. So you think about older adults. But what about someone who's young, who got a young terminal illness, or, you know, who hasn't had this extensive long life? What can we say to those people dealing with the young person dealing with the death or their family members?
Well, I can tell you the truth from my experience, which is it is much harder on the families than the young person. Young people mature beyond. I get a little emotional about this because I have had young people die with me, and you know, they're extraordinary. They grow up so fast. They so get it. And when I talk about young people, I'm also talking about like 12-year-olds and that kind of thing. Children. It's the adults, because it's so powerful and painful, and because you know they're not going to live the life that you wanted for them. So that's much, much harder. And that goes into the realm of beyond me. You know, sometimes you need to get a real therapist in there or a social worker to get in there to really deal, because it's very, very powerful to see a child, because when somebody's in their 80s or 90s, not that death is ever welcome or a happy thing, but you feel that that's a life, it's lived a long life. But when somebody's 12 years old or 15 or 20 or 30, that's really tough. You know, I look to this movie star who just died. I don't really know him, but
Paul Walker.
Paul Walker. And you see that. I mean, I never knew him. I didn't ever even heard of him. But what I'm seeing on the news is what a loving, lovely person. He left a 15-year-old. I mean, I'm sure that people around him are inconsolable because he's 40 years old and had a whole life ahead of him. So it's very hard. So I think you just have to let people grieve, and just to, you know, it's just much harder. I think it's much harder. And you need to bring in some professionals that are beyond what I'm capable of doing.
Based on your experience, why do you think young people, when they are themselves terminally ill, why do you think they mature so much faster? What's happening, or what do you think?
Well, I think the younger we are, I think it was Aristotle, I'm not sure, that said we're born basically knowing everything, and then we get stupider as we get older. And so I think what he really meant by that, he didn't use those words,
Yeah.
those are my words, but I think what he meant by that is that we're so innocent, and the older we get, the less innocent we get in terms of fears. We start getting more fears, and I think younger people get it much faster. Like if you've ever seen
Because they're
a
so
St. Jude
close
commercial,
maybe to
well, they
having
understand
just-
it. First of all, people are more honest with children.
Yep.
The parents may not be, but nurses and doctors are. And these children know, first of all, they're experiencing physical pain and discomfort that most children don't. They're around other children. They see, like if they're at a place like St. Jude's, they see other children dying. And so they understand. I don't know that they understand exactly, but all of it, but they understand it on a much more mature level than they don't cling as much and get as hysterical, which I find amazing. I mean, to see that. But
Yeah,
they
you hear
really,
stories like that, and I'm always
they
like, what
definitely,
is
it's
it?
true.
Yeah.
Well, they just have a sense of, this is what's going to happen, and children can live day to day more than adults. We're all planning like 10 years from now, the
future.
holiday, the thing, and and children just look to the next day.
Yeah.
They don't make plans the way adults do. So I think that they understand that each day is like a gift, whereas we don't get that. We're saying, I may only have like 6 months left, whereas children, 6 months could be like,
It feels like a lifetime.
Exactly.
Because time is so much longer
Right.
when you're younger. I mean, I feel that may be the case.
well, I'll tell you one of the most adorable things I ever heard, and this doesn't have to do with death and dying, but I was walking down the street and I heard a 5 or 6 year old saying to another child, I've been eating peanut butter and jelly my entire life. And with such intensity, and I thought, that's pretty impressive,
Yeah,
my
that is.
entire life, So I think that's how children see
Yep.
it. Their whole life is right in front, it's right there.
Yeah, they're
right
living.
there.
They're living in the present.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and we don't.
Yeah.
We're in the past, the future, now, whatever. We're all over the place.
Yeah,
So,
it's hard
yeah.
for adults to live in the present.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you can believe, we're almost at the end of our show.
Wow.
So maybe, is there something you want to leave our audience with? Maybe something we haven't covered, something I've forgotten to ask you about
Well-
your book, or I mean, you said you're also writing a blog, maybe, or how to reach that blog.
Yeah, I'm on southendpatch.com and also Brookline Patch. And I'm going to be giving a big talk on January 6th at Project Place.
Great.
So I'm excited about that. And I'll be hopefully putting something in, I'll be putting that in the South End. So
the
that'll,
Patch,
on the events. But I think my mission is to help teach people. I think I have been. I think I
Yeah.
have a gift to do that. And I just feel like it's so important
Yeah.
on so many levels, not just for the person who's dying, but for the family, because it brings families together. It allows people to feel that they did a good job at such an important time in somebody else's life. And I think that's just unbelievably important.
Yeah. And you're so easy to talk to, so I can imagine you must be an amazing teacher.
Oh, well, one would hope. I mean, that's my goal.
So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
And it was so lovely to talk to you. And hopefully we'll see you again.
I hope so. Thank you.
Thanks for watching Seniors Count, brought to you by Mayor Thomas M. Menino and our Commissioner Emily Shea. To contact us, please call 617-635-4366 or the Mayor's 24-hour hotline at 617-635-4500. Or you can email us at elderly@cityofboston.gov. And you can find us on Facebook. Have a great afternoon.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them blue for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Yes, I think to myself,